The Kentucky sun blazed with a relentless fury, pressing down on the rolling hills and narrow backroads like a weight that refused to lift. The cicadas hummed their endless chorus from the trees, their high-pitched buzzing weaving in with the occasional cry of a distant crow. Along one such forgotten stretch of asphalt, where fields of tall grass bent in slow waves with the wind, a sleek silver Mercedes sat stranded, one tire sagging flat against the gravel shoulder. Inside, Matthew Evans shifted uncomfortably in his leather seat, drumming his thumb against the wheel in a rhythm that betrayed both irritation and impatience. The car was immaculate, like everything else in his life, polished to perfection, smelling faintly of leather and cedar, a machine that reflected his personality, efficient, successful, precise. Yet now it sat humbled, useless, its glossy sheen unable to mask the fact that without air in its tire, it was just another hunk of metal on the side of a dusty road. Matthew himself looked every bit the man he had built himself to be. 78 years of life had not dulled the sharpness of his gaze, nor had it stripped him of the air of authority he carried wherever he went. His silver hair was neatly combed, his shirt pressed even for a simple drive, his wristwatch gleaming like a small sun against his skin. He was a man accustomed to control, to having problems solved with a phone call, a signature, or a swipe of his platinum card. And yet here he was, in the heat of rural Kentucky, his phone flashing no service, as useless to him as the flat tire. He sighed, long and heavy, leaning back into the seat. Waiting had never been his strong suit. His entire career in finance had been built on speed, striking before the competition, closing deals before hesitation could creep in. Patience was for the weak, or so he'd always told himself. But here, under the merciless sun, patience was all he had. He tilted his head back, letting the hum of the air conditioner wash over him, though it struggled against the heat. His eyes drifted shut for just a moment, his thoughts flickering through memories of boardrooms, long lunches at expensive restaurants, flights across oceans for meetings that felt, in retrospect, like wars fought in suits and ties. He had won most of those wars. The proof sat in his bank accounts, his sprawling estate, his collections of art and antiques. And yet, as sweat formed at his temple, none of it seemed to matter in this moment. The sound of gravel crunching underfoot pulled him from his thoughts. His eyes opened, narrowing in the rearview mirror. A figure was approaching, slender, small, the shape of a boy. Matthew sat up straighter, curiosity piqued. The boy came closer, step by steady step until he was visible in the heat shimmer. He looked no older than 13 or 14, his t-shirt faded from too many washes, his sneakers frayed at the edges, the soles worn thin. His hair was a little messy, his jeans patched in one knee, but there was nothing hesitant about his stride. He walked like someone with purpose, as though he had already decided why he was there. When he reached the car, he stopped, eyes narrowing as they fell on the flat tire. He gave a small, polite nod towards Matthew. "Got a flat, sir?" he asked. The boy's voice was steady, neither timid nor overly bold, just steady, like the sure strike of a hammer on a nail. Matthew found himself blinking at the boy, momentarily disarmed. "Yes," he admitted. "Yes, I do. I tried calling for roadside assistance, but—" He held up the useless phone. "No signal." The boy gave a faint smile, almost knowing. "I can help with that," he said, already crouching down beside the tire without waiting for further invitation. Matthew frowned, curiosity tugging at his thoughts. "You know how to change a tire?" The boy glanced up briefly, his expression serious but calm. "My grandpa taught me last summer. Do you have a spare?" "Yes," Matthew replied, gesturing vaguely towards the trunk. The boy moved with quiet efficiency, retrieving the tools and the spare with movements that carried no waste. His hands were small but sure, loosening the bolts, propping the car with the jack, pulling the deflated tire free. He grunted softly with the effort, but there was no complaint, no hesitation. His brow furrowed in concentration, his lips pressed thin with determination. Matthew stepped out of the car, the hot air wrapping around him like a blanket. He stood there, hands on his hips, watching the boy. It struck him how unusual this moment was. A child fixing a stranger's luxury car without a trace of fear or reluctance. "Careful," Matthew said instinctively as the boy leaned harder on the wrench. The boy only nodded, not pausing, not faltering. Minutes later, the new tire was snugly in place, the bolts tightened one by one. The boy dusted his hands on his jeans, standing with a small, satisfied smile. "All done," he said simply. Matthew raised his brows. "That quickly?" He shrugged lightly. "It's not that hard once you know how." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Matthew pulled out his wallet, fingers brushing against the crisp bills he always carried. He held out a few notes. "Here, I appreciate your help." The boy's eyes flicked to the money, but instead of reaching for it, he took a step back and lifted his hand politely. "Thank you, sir, but I don't need anything. Just happy to help." The word struck him like a bell in a quiet room. His hand hovered, money extended, while the boy turned, gave a polite nod, and began walking back down the road, the gravel crunching softly under his sneakers. Matthew stood frozen, the bills still in his hand. Slowly, almost guiltily, he slipped them back into his wallet. He returned to the Mercedes, sliding into the cool leather seat. For a long moment, he didn't start the engine. He just watched the boy's shrinking figure in the mirror until the curve of the road swallowed him from sight. The rest of the drive home was a blur. The fountain in his driveway sprayed arcs of water into the evening light, the hedges perfectly trimmed, the mansion's windows gleaming like mirrors. Yet when Matthew stepped inside, the silence felt heavier than usual. He ate nothing of the steak his chef had prepared. He drank scotch in his study, surrounded by books he hadn't opened in years, and all the while one image lingered in his mind: a boy with dusty sneakers, a steady voice, and a refusal to take money. That night, sleep would not come. Each time Matthew closed his eyes, he saw the boy again, and by morning, one thought had taken root in his mind, a thought he could not ignore. He had to find him again. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Matthew Evans' estate, casting pale gold light across the marble floors. Yet for all the beauty, the mansion felt cavernous, too large for a man who lived alone. He sat at the long dining table, sipping black coffee from a porcelain cup, but the rich aroma did little to ground him. His mind was elsewhere. It had been 3 days since he'd met the boy, 3 nights of restless tossing, haunted by dusty sneakers and words that carried more weight than Matthew had expected. "I don't need anything, just happy to help." Simple, almost casual, and yet they had unsettled him in a way no boardroom defeat ever had. Wealthy men like Matthew were used to gratitude, to people scrambling to please, to hands outstretched when money was offered. But that boy, Elijah, as Matthew had overheard when another kid called his name as he walked away, had turned away from cash as though it were nothing more than paper, and now Matthew couldn't let it go. By noon, he found himself back behind the wheel of his Mercedes, driving the same country road where the tire had failed. The fields rolled by in endless green, the cicadas sang again, and he slowed near the spot. He scanned the edges of the road, the bend in the distance, the fence posts that leaned with time. And then he saw it. A small house, weathered, its paint peeling, its porch sagging slightly at one corner. Laundry flapped on a line, stretched between 2 posts, children's shirts and faded towels moving with the breeze. The place looked humble, lived in, and for some reason, Matthew's chest tightened. He turned the car into the narrow dirt drive. Gravel popped under the tires, and as he stopped, the screen door creaked open. Out stepped Elijah. The boy froze for a second when he saw the Mercedes, confusion flickering across his face. Then recognition settled, and his lips curved into a small, polite smile. "Hello again, sir. Elijah said, walking closer. Matthew stepped out, adjusting his blazer, though he felt oddly nervous, a sensation foreign to him. "Hello, Elijah," he said carefully, testing the name. "I wanted to thank you properly. You helped me the other day. I wasn't satisfied with just leaving it at that." Elijah tilted his head slightly, curiosity shining in his eyes. "You don't need to thank me again. It was nothing." Before Matthew could respond, a woman's voice called from the porch, "Elijah, who's out there?" She stepped outside, a woman in her 40s, apron tied at her waist, hair pulled back into a bun. Her face bore lines of both age and effort, but her eyes were kind. She glanced between the luxury car and the well-dressed stranger, suspicion flickering for just a heartbeat before politeness softened her tone. "This is the man I helped with his car?" Elijah explained. Matthew offered a small nod. "Matthew Evans, ma'am." The woman wiped her hands on her apron. "Well, Mr. Evans, you're welcome here, though we don't have much to offer. Would you like to come in for some sweet tea? It's hot today." For reasons he couldn't quite explain, Matthew accepted. The inside of the house smelled faintly of cornbread and wood polish. It was small, the furniture worn but carefully kept, family photos covering the walls, smiling faces, graduations, birthdays, snapshots of joy that money couldn't buy. A wooden cross hung above the kitchen door, its edges polished from years of dusting. They sat at the table, the mother pouring tea into mismatched glasses. The drink was cool and sweet, a sharp contrast to the heat pressing at the windows. "Elijah doesn't stop talking about helping you," the woman said with a smile, giving her son a sideways glance. "He was proud to be useful." Matthew looked at the boy, who ducked his head slightly, embarrassed. "He was more than useful. He was efficient, confident. He reminded me of someone I used to be." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Silence followed for a moment, then the woman cleared her throat softly. "We just try to raise our children right, sir, to help when they can, to be honest, and to work hard. Money isn't always there, but character is." The sentence hit Matthew like a hammer striking an old bell. He sipped his tea, staring into the amber liquid, hearing echoes of his own father long gone, a man who had once spoken about hard work and honesty before Matthew's hunger for success had drowned out such lessons. Lunch followed, simple and hearty. Beans cooked with onions, cornbread fresh from the oven, collard greens with a touch of vinegar. The flavors were unfamiliar, yet comforting, carrying the warmth of family meals that Matthew hadn't known in decades. He watched Elijah chatter about school, about his love for building things, about how he dreamed of one day being an engineer. His hands moved as he spoke, sketching shapes in the air, excitement lighting his young face. Something stirred in Matthew's chest, admiration, perhaps, or a pang of regret for opportunities he had once stepped over in pursuit of profit. After lunch, as he stood to leave, he caught sight of the cracked porch, the peeling paint, the way the screen door sagged on its hinges. The house was sturdy, but it wore its years openly. He turned to Elijah's mother. "Thank you for your hospitality. It's rare these days to find such warmth. We don't have much, but what we do have, we share." Those words echoed in his mind as he drove away, the image of Elijah waving from the porch growing smaller in the mirror. That evening, Matthew sat in his study once more, but this time the silence was different. He stared at the shelves of books, the oil paintings, the gleam of wealth surrounding him, and he thought of patched sneakers, mismatched glasses, and the way a family with little had given him so much more than food. They had given him a glimpse of something he had lost. The next morning, contractors began receiving calls. Matthew Evans, the man who rarely gave away money without strings, had made a decision. The house where Elijah lived would not stand weathered much longer. Within the week, trucks rumbled down that dirt road. Workers climbed ladders, paint cans clinked, hammers struck nails with steady rhythm. Neighbors slowed to watch, whispering at the sight of strangers in uniform swarming the little house. And Elijah stood at the edge of the yard. Matthew stood on the newly built porch, leaning lightly on the polished railing that only weeks ago had been sagging and weathered, his gaze fixed on the vibrant life unfolding before him. The air was filled with the sound of children's laughter, the rhythmic creak of the brand-new swing set as Elijah and a couple of his neighborhood friends soared back and forth with gleeful shouts, and the hum of conversation as neighbors milled around, curious to see the miraculous transformation of a once worn-down house into something that now radiated warmth and dignity. For Matthew, who had spent decades surrounded by marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and fine art, it was startling how much more alive this modest street now felt compared to the hollow quiet of his estate. Every detail, each patch of fresh paint, the sturdy wooden porch, the smell of cut lumber still lingering faintly in the air, was a physical reminder of what could be built when people cared. Not for profit, not for recognition, but simply because it was right. He had funded the repairs, yes, but he felt as though the true builder here was Elijah, whose quiet act of kindness had set into motion a chain of events that not even Matthew's vast wealth had ever been able to buy: connection, gratitude, and a sense of belonging. As he sipped the iced tea Elijah's mother had pressed into his hand, he reflected on the strange turn his life had taken. He had once thought his legacy would be his investments, his businesses, his net worth. Now he saw that his true legacy might be something far simpler: helping one family find security, inspiring one boy to dream bigger, and rediscovering himself in the process. Elijah bounded up the steps, his face flushed from playing, sweat beading at his brow, but his eyes shining with the kind of light that only youth and hope can create. "Mr. Matthew," he said breathlessly, plopping down beside him on the porch, "I've been thinking a lot about all this." He gestured broadly, as though his small hand could capture the enormity of what had unfolded: the house, the yard, the people. "I want to build things too. Not just houses, but big things, important things. Bridges, schools, maybe even hospitals. I want to make places where people feel safe." Matthew felt something tighten in his chest, a mixture of pride and ache, because in Elijah's words, he heard not only the spark of a future engineer, but also the echo of the boy's innate selflessness. It wasn't just about the fascination with tools or wood or concrete. It was about creating, giving, leaving the world better than he had found it. Matthew placed a weathered hand on Elijah's shoulder, squeezing gently. "You already started, son. What you did for me, on that road, you built something bigger than a house. You built a bridge between two strangers. Don't ever lose that." Elijah's smile widened, but he lowered his gaze shyly, as if embarrassed by the praise. Matthew, however, couldn't let it go at that. He turned to face him more directly. "I want you to promise me something," he continued. Elijah looked up, his expression curious. "Promise me you'll follow that dream. Don't let anyone tell you you can't. Not the world, not circumstances, not even your own doubts. You have a gift, Elijah, and it's not just your skill, it's your heart. That combination is rare. People with both, they change the world." The boy's eyes gleamed, and in that moment, Matthew saw the man Elijah could one day become: strong, kind, unyielding. For the first time in decades, Matthew felt hope for the future, not in the abstract sense of markets and trends, but in something far more concrete. This boy, this family, this town. As the sun sank lower, painting the horizon in molten streaks of orange and gold, Elijah's mother joined them on the porch. She carried herself with a quiet grace, her hands worn from work, her eyes tired but steady, and she looked at Matthew as if trying to measure the depth of his intentions. "Mr. Evans," she said softly, "you've done more for us than we could ever repay. This house, it's more than just walls and floors. It's a second chance, a fresh start. You've given my son hope, and you've given me peace of mind I haven't felt in years. Thank you doesn't seem enough." Matthew shook his head gently. "It's I who should be thanking you," he replied. "You've reminded me of something I forgot long ago. Success isn't about what we accumulate. It's about the lives we touch. And your son, he touched mine before I ever did a thing for him." Her eyes glistened,